Welcome to Stepping Toward Justice with me, Sarah A. Ford, a podcast where we'll explore what justice really looks like inside of a courtroom, outside in our communities, and where access to justice is lacking. We'll talk with advocates, survivors, and changemakers working to make justice a reality for us all. We can't change what we don't understand or acknowledge, so let's take a step together towards justice. Welcome to our next episode of Stepping Toward Justice with me, Sarah A. Ford, and I have our producer, Zeke Stevenson, joining me on camera today. Hey,
Hello.
Zeke. People may know you from the Victims Matter rally because you had your stole. Is that what we call it?
Bright red stole. That's right.
Because you are a pastor, and you met another pastor who was decked in your pastoral gear wearing Vans. How cool is that?
That was, and I was trying to, it was like a morning game time decision whether I was going to wear my Vans to the rally. And I said, let's do it. And so then I was standing there and I saw someone walk up and she had a collar on, which is just another clerical vestment that you can choose from. And so we got into a conversation and then both realized that we had our Vans on. And so of course we had to get a picture. But then I had no idea who it was, who took the picture. So Sarah, I was texting you like screenshots of pictures and video, and then we finally figured out who it was. We tracked down the picture. It was pretty cool. But she is awesome. Yeah.
Pastors with the Vans on. I like it.
Yeah.
So we kind of jumped right in. We had the Victims Matter rally on May 9th, just a couple of days ago, where we gathered at the South Carolina State House to rally to hear from victims and survivors and from some legislators to talk about victims' rights, where victims' rights are lacking in South Carolina, how we can do better, and really try to motivate some action in this movement. Because there was definitely a vibe that we had that was just very positively committed to saying, hey, we got work to do, folks. We've got to make things better for crime victims in South Carolina. And being right there on the steps going up to the South Carolina State House, it's just kind of this awesome building that you have there, and you have these people that are standing there, and you feel pretty small standing at the bottom of those stairs, but with that microphone, your voice carries. And I heard from people who said, I was in downtown Columbia and I heard your voice. So it carries, and it really, the messaging, I think, was just so incredibly powerful from each of the folks that spoke. We started with Representative Brandon Guffey, who is a new legislator from York County. And we were just talking before he came on camera that the bill that he brought forth this year, it was 3583, which would outlaw sextortion, just passed the Senate. So it passed the House unanimously, I think, a couple weeks ago, just passed the Senate. I think it's got to go back to the House because there was an amendment, but fully expect for that to be heading to Governor McMaster's desk.
Sarah, let's let our listeners hear a little bit what Representative Guffey said.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. As Sarah said, the one thing that sticks with you is whenever a crime happens is that you don't want this to happen to another family. And that has been my passion. I lost my son, Gavin, in July of 2022. And I'd never heard of the crime previously. As I started to dive in, I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue. I just won my primary. Wasn't sure if I wanted to go into politics. And my wife said, you're one of the few people with a voice that can actually get up there and do something. So since I've came to Columbia, that has been my number one goal, is coming in. I've dove in. As they say, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. I can definitely say that is true. And trying to understand how our justice system works, I've seen it from afar with victims like we have for the family of Larry Vaughn that's here today out of Rock Hill in my area. I've seen how it doesn't appear to be fair. And I've seen that we have a lot of work to do. As I've come in, I'm one of the few freshmen on the Judiciary Committee. Within my first week, I would say the thing that I was shocked about the most was the way that we select our judges. I don't believe that it's fair. Not that I believe a popularity contest is the way to go, but I do believe that judicial reform should be at the top of all of our lists. So I urge each and every one of you to stay in touch with your representatives and your senators to urge and push for judicial reform. We have many bills out there. I just co-sponsored one last week from another freshman that filed it, Representative Joe White. And we've got to get this bill through the House, get it through the Senate, and not just provide lip service to our constituents. It's time for some real change. I appreciate everyone coming out today.
We were just struck by Representative Guffey's words, and in my ministerial career, I work with teenagers every day. And so to hear the story of his son and what he experienced, and the fact that his son didn't feel like there were any other options in his situation other than taking his own life, was something that just really struck me. And I had done a little bit of research on Representative Guffey and his story and his son's story prior to the Victims Matter rally, but just hearing him talk about it was so powerful.
It really was. And, you know, it from every person that spoke who was a victim or survivor, everyone individually had said to me at some point, you know, I don't want what happened to me or to my family to happen to somebody else. And when someone can take that tragedy, that heartache, and try to turn it into something positive to help other people, it's just incredible. It really is. I was so grateful to him for coming to share that.
And all of this happened in the midst of him campaigning for
the seat. Yeah.
I think he had just won his primary and he was gearing up for a general election. And he talked about in his speech about just giving up. You know, he didn't have the energy to do it anymore. And, you know, I always think about for such a time as this, and he saw the opportunity. He saw his potential place of power in the South Carolina State House to bring about change. And, you know, I don't know a ton about how state houses work. I don't know a ton about how all of this works, but how many freshman representatives can say that they go into the state house in their very first year and have such a big piece of legislation pass, and not only pass, but pass the House unanimously?
What a legacy that he has created for his son Gavin, and what hope that gives all of us, you know, that you might be, you know, a freshman legislator, but there's always work that we can do. And he saw this as the time that he was going to make a mark to protect other victims, to protect other kids, to protect other folks who have been victims of this. And I'm very grateful to his leadership on this. Yeah. And speaking of leadership, the next speaker, Miss Delores Boyd, is just, I would call her a warrior advocate, because she is the mother. Her son, Damian Green, passed away back in 2015. He was murdered in his home. You know, she never missed a hearing. She was involved in called everyone, met with everyone, did everything she possibly could. And ultimately, her son's the case was dismissed just earlier this year in 2023. It's just tragic because it took so long to get his murderers charged and then tried. But you can tell, even though she is will always be grieving her son and grieving her loss of faith in the judicial system, she spread a message of hope as well, which was
Certainly.
she's just an amazing, amazing person. She really is.
Yeah, let's take a listen to her speech.
Good morning. As Sarah stated, my name is Delores Boyd, and my son, Damian Melvin Green, was murdered August the 6th, 2015. I am a person of faith who worked my son's case alongside my family tirelessly. The justice system as a whole failed me and my family. We trusted a system who let us down to the point where, in the end, the faith in the judicial system doesn't exist to me because it doesn't work for victims, only accused criminals or high-profile victims. It took SLED and the solicitor's office 4 years and 3 months to call me and my family in to inform us that warrants would be issued in this case. We were told by the solicitor's office that this was one of the hardest work cases they had seen in a while. He told us that they had 2 eyewitnesses that saw the perpetrators go into Damian's home, heard gunshots, and saw the perpetrators leave Damian's home. It was daylight, so this was supposed to be open and shut. However, it was anything but. From day one to this point, SLED had no new evidence, no physical evidence was ever found. Everything was exactly the same from 2015 to 2019. So my question is, why didn't an arrest happen earlier? I'll tell you what they were doing. Nothing. But my family and myself continued working Damian's case. Judges were asking bond hearings. Why did it take so long to make an arrest? Or why is it taking so long to bring this case to trial? I remember going to a bond hearing. It was a continuation bond hearing, and feeling as if my rights were violated because the judge gave the defendant an opportunity to speak and ignored me. It was as if I wasn't even there. And of course, he was granted bond. A bonding company requested a hearing to part ways with this defendant and stated that the defendant was tampering with the monitor and removing it. They wanted to sever their relationship. The judge granted them that. But however, the judge took away the ankle monitor completely and lowered the bond. Yes, a criminal was rewarded for breaking the law again. One of the defendants was allowed out on bond, and it wasn't until I investigated and notified the prosecutor that he committed a crime in Casey, South Carolina, and was a fugitive there. And finally, the bond was revoked. In 2019, 4 years after my son's death, warrants went out for the defendants. The case went to trial 7 years later. In February 2023, we were notified of a bond hearing. The defendant's lawyer, the defendant's lawyer announced that the state's primary witness was dead. The bombshell was dropped. The solicitor's office sat on this case so long, not one, but 2 witnesses died 7 years apart. I have never been given a legitimate answer on several things in this case. And it's sad. We were called to the solicitor's office in February 2023 to let us know that without the primary eyewitnesses, the case would be dismissed. Things seemed wrong early on during this case, so I sought help through SC Van. And I would like to take the opportunity at this moment to thank them for the countless hours that they have helped me and given me confirmation that my thoughts were correct. The judicial system is broken, Victims are barely included in the process. The system is designed for accused criminals or high-profile victims. I left broken and without even an apology. It is my prayer that this system gets fixed. It is my prayer that there needs to be no bond for accused murderers. And also, when these murder trials come to court, that there are someone, a mutual party, that's able to sit in on these trials and make sure that victims are getting what they deserve, making sure the judges are not violating our rights, ensuring that we get a fair chance to allow our family members' legacies to live on. Because at this point, we are failed. We are being failed terribly through the justice system. Thank you.
I went up to Miss Delores and thanked her for being there, and thanked her even before I heard her speak for the words that she was going to share, and the impact that she had on so many victims and their families as she advocates for her son. And she said, this is all I know to do. You know, I wouldn't expect anything less from a mother, but what strong words, and what a story, what a message to share, that, you know, she lost her son, but that doesn't mean she's going to stop advocating on his behalf.
Always a mama.
Yeah, always a mama.
You know, she was failed on so many different levels, you know, of the system. You know, we have different pieces of our system, whether law enforcement gets warrants and the solicitor's office, you know, gets the case, and you have hearings along and along to make sure that the case is moving along. And it just seems like in her case, these checks and balances, so to speak, just, they did not check out. They did not keep things from falling through the cracks. And, you know, it's painful as someone who's worked in the system my entire adult career to hear how the system failed her, because it shouldn't be that way. And I've got to share that she sent me a note yesterday and said that as long as the good Lord is willing, she will be there every single year at the Victims Matter rally. And I am so grateful for that, because her voice is one that we need to hear, that our legislators need to hear, that our judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, that we all need to hear. Karl Stoller is our next speaker from the rally. And, you know, we all heard from Karl, if you've been listening to our Stepping Toward Justice episodes. I've known him and his family, and his daughter, Dallas, who was an alleged victim of sexual assault back in 2018. And unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago from a self-inflicted wound. And Karl and his wife, Michelle, and his daughter, Brett, who we've heard from, his other daughter, Carly, their entire family, just incredible people who have been given this mission. You know, it's not a mission that anybody wants, but they have taken this mission not only to demand justice for Dallas, but for other victims, so that they are not forgotten. They are not left behind in a system that is not designed for them. And, you know, every time I hear Karl, and I've talked to Karl a lot over the years, you know, he's somebody that I think a lot of people would look at and say, well, he's in law enforcement. He's, you know, from small town, low country, South Carolina. He looks like a good old boy. Well, let me tell you, Karl has a message for the good old boys, and I want y'all to listen to it now.
Good morning. Before I begin, I would like to thank Sarah Ford and her staff at SC Van for having me here today to speak. More importantly, I would like to thank you all for being here this morning. Your presence gives me hope that the majority of my fellow South Carolinians are ready for change and ready to fight for victims. Our family's story begins on a fall night in October of 2018. On that night, our daughter, Dallas Stoller, attended a party in Danbury County, South Carolina. On that night, she became a victim of sexual assault. Little did I know this would be the beginning of the end of our beautiful daughter. As a little over 3 years later, she would succumb to a self-inflicted injury. Dallas was a beautiful young lady with loads of potential, a bright future, and a heart as big as the world itself. After that fateful night, I watched a system I so strongly believed in, aid in destroying our child's life and severely injuring the lives of two other young ladies who are also victims in this case. I watched the good old boy system start its engines and work its magic for a well-connected defendant. I watched as a third young lady became a victim exactly 41 days later at the hands of this defendant while he was out on unmonitored bond for the sexual assault of our daughter. I watched as a sitting South Carolina state senator stood in a courtroom in Orangeburg County, South Carolina, and publicly slut-shamed this young lady. I watched the deputy solicitor of the 2nd Judicial Circuit drop our daughter's case because she was no longer here to face her attacker. Lastly, in April of 2022, I watched a circuit court judge allow this defendant to walk away with a 5-year probationary sentence for assault and battery 1st degree, no sex offender registry, and an ability to have his record fully expunged once he completed the terms of his probation. That, my friends, is what justice for victims looks like here in South Carolina. Out front in the public eye, our courts, some solicitors, some attorneys, etc., say openly victims matter. They argue this whole lawyer-legislator thing and the way we appoint our judges has no impact on justice for our victims. They argue we are only making noise because things didn't work out for our daughter and other victims. I say they are very wrong. We have been silent for exactly a year now. We have been silent because we were asked to be. We were told our silence would allow the 2nd Judicial Circuit's Solicitor's Office to take a second look at Dallas's case, admitting privately, to a degree, they had made mistakes regarding her case. Well, folks, this is what our ask for silence has earned us so far. To date, we have received one call from their office, and it appears, based on that conversation, we are no further along than we were a year ago. That conversation has left us with even less hope anything will ever be done. I want to say publicly how very proud I am of Dallas's sisters, Brett and Carly, for taking on this fight on behalf of not only their late sister, but also fighting for all victims in our state. Their passion for this fight has ignited a flame in me, and I pray has done the same for you all. I pray their courage has given you the courage to say publicly, enough is enough. That you are no longer willing to accept things as they are and stand ready to fight alongside us to ensure victims are no longer victimized by our system. I implore each and every one of you to fight for real change. Remember, evil knows no boundaries. Evil cares nothing about the balance in your bank account, where you live, how well you were raised, who you know, or what you believe your social standing is. I'm saying no one is exempt from becoming a victim when evil comes knocking. I pray evil never comes to visit you. I pray none of you have to feel or live with what we have to. However, if you do become a victim, I pray together we have made positive change and future victims will be treated with compassion and understanding, not be treated the way many victims are today and not have your rights violated. In closing, I want all our representatives and senators to know we are fighters and no longer will accept things as they are. I've taught my girls to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. I've taught them to stand up for what is right. Always remember, a strong person fights for themselves. A stronger person fights for others. We, as a family, are stronger people and will continue to fight for our late daughter, Dallas, and all victims. We will be silent no longer. Justice for her, justice for Dallas, justice for Chloe, justice for all. Thank you.
Sarah, when Karl was on the episode of Stepping Toward Justice, he was just so measured. He was so, you could tell he was really thinking through every word that he spoke. And the Karl at the Victims Matter rally was a whole different Karl. And
he was fiery. Yeah.
He was fiery, yes. And we saw a lot of that from his daughter Brett in the interview and that she did with us. And so to see him stand at that podium choking back tears, but also speaking with such strong authority and really taking it to the system.
You know, and I've said this about every person that we've talked about so far, but, you know, when I was thinking of people that I wanted to ask to join us for the rally, I kept thinking, you know, there are so many incredible speakers, but the people who spoke were exactly the people that I think we needed to hear from because their messages were just so on point with sharing their heartache, sharing their grief, sharing their experiences, but also sharing, we're not going to accept this. Like, this is not just our problem because this happened to our family. This is everyone's problem. Don't wait for something terrible to happen in your family for you to care about this because you need to care about it now.
Yep.
Anytime Karl is one, I always tell Karl, as long as I'm doing this work and as long as I'm involved in this rally, you're coming back too. So
sure. Well, he was such a strong, powerful speaker. And I think he made it clear in that speech that his measured, quiet nature was gone.
The time for being quiet is over.
Yes. I think that from here on out, we're going to see fiery Karl Stoller. And I'm here for it.
I am definitely here for it.
Here for it.
And I was really so grateful for the next two speakers, Miss Sandy Smith, who's the mother of Stephen Smith, who was murdered in Hampton County back in 2015, that she would join us along with Mandy Matney, who is a journalist and the creator of Cup of Justice and the Murdoch Murders podcast, for them to join us because, you know, Sandy has been fighting just for people to pay attention to her son's case for years. And I'm, you know, just hearing from her, I'm so grateful and thankful that just a few months ago, the case was reopened and, you know, as a homicide investigation, not as a hit and run as it had initially been reported. And, you know, it gives me hope. And I know that it gives other people hope that, you know, 8 years is a long time, but you can have have forward movement in a case. And I think a lot of that had to do with just her commitment to her son. But also, I know that she met Mandy back in 2019, and telling her story with Mandy and Liz Farrell, and now working with Eric Bland. I think getting Stephen's story out there, when victims don't have recourse in the system, the media is a great place to get that justice and that attention. And you hate that you have to say every victim deserves the full investigation, the most appropriate and attention that anyone could possibly give. But sometimes that doesn't happen until the media gets involved. And I'm grateful that the media did get involved.
Yeah, Sarah, let's let our listeners hear Mandy and Sandy speak at the rally.
Okay. My name is Sandy Smith. I'm the mother of Stephen. Stephen was killed on July 8th of 2015, and his homicide remains unsolved. Stephen was kind. Stephen was smart. Stephen was buried in his medical scrubs because he was on track to become a doctor so that he could help others. But he never got that chance because someone killed him. For 8 years, we have been fighting for Stephen to get the answers in his case. I don't know how to fix the problem that led to my son's murder being mishandled from the beginning, but I do know that I'm thankful to have so many wonderful people helping me to get justice for Stephen. Mandy Matney is joining me here as a friend, but also as an advocate for change. And she has some words to share.
Thank you, Sandy. My name is Mandy Matney. I'm a journalist and an advocate for victims. When I met Sandy in 2019, I was appalled at how public agencies were failing Sandy, failing Stephen, and failing South Carolina. As we dove deeper into Stephen's case, I learned about so many other families who were also failed by public systems that are supposed to protect them, or at the very least, provide equal footing. Yet it seems too often these failures are designed by powerful people in pursuit of unequal applications of justice. Our state house belongs to each of us South Carolinians. And we are here to remind our legislators that each member of our statewide community deserves the same access and benefits of our legal and law enforcement systems. Sandy Smith deserved to have her son's homicide investigated zealously. Dallas Stoller deserved to have law enforcement and the solicitor's office take her seriously. And when local agencies fail victims, it's up to the state to hold local agencies accountable, not provide cover. And when any local agencies fails, we in the media exist to light the lamps that expose those failures, wherever the truth may lead. We give up individual liberty in exchange for the promise that these systems will keep us safe. And this exchange is made with public trust. Each time the justice system overlooks incompetence, collusion, or corruption, that public trust is compromised. Every time someone with access, power, or money manipulates the system to their advantage, public trust is compromised. It's time that we all demand one system of justice, not one for the powerful and another for everyone else. Heinous crimes are committed every day, and there are so many who work tirelessly on the behalf of the victims left in the wake. It seems like our systems are not impervious to a corruption that rots trust from within. Crime and corruption are not always walking hand in hand, but they are often lurking in the shadows where sunlight fails to shine. Thank you, Sandy, Karl, and Delores, for sharing your bravery. It is a beacon of light to countless others seeking justice. And thank you to all of you who are here today, who wish to make South Carolina change for the better, for the victims. Thank you.
And I'm just so happy for her. And it's weird to say I'm happy for
Yeah.
her when it involves her son's death and losing a child. But I'm just so happy for her that not that her work in advocacy would ever be in vain, but that there is some things happening in Stephen's case.
I'm very grateful for Sandy and Mandy, and Mandy's. I told her a few weeks ago when I asked if if she and Sandy would join us. She's a victim advocate. She's a journalist, but she's a victim's advocate, and we can all do that. We can all be victim advocates, and no matter what it is that we do in our day-to-day life. And really, it just comes from listening, caring, showing compassion, empathy, and centering their voices, listening to them and elevating, what is important to them because they've been there. And I think that, Mandy and Liz have done a great job of that, particularly with the Stephen Smith case. So I work for the South Carolina Victim Assistance Network, and our co-sponsor of the Victims Matter rally is the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And they have been wonderful partners over the past 2 years as we've put this rally and lobbying day together. And Shannon Nix was a wonderful addition to our steering committee this year. She has such a history with working with victims in a trauma-informed, victim-centered way. She's done, worked with college-age kids. She's, done all sorts of victim-centered advocacy and, work in counseling for victims. And she just brings such a wealth of knowledge in that area. And SCADVASA does a tremendous amount of lobbying, for victims' issues at the South Carolina State House. They are a coalition of member organizations. So your local domestic violence shelter or agency or sexual assault center, they are part of that coalition of SCADVASA. So they really do amazing work all across the state of South Carolina, and certainly the lobbying they do is top notch. And so we're going to hear from Shannon, talk a little bit about what they've seen this year, some of the positives, some of the things that we need to pay attention to. And so let's take a listen.
Good morning. I just want to quickly thank everyone who shared their stories this morning. So impactful. People need to hear them, so thank you. We stand on the steps of the State House today to remind legislators that their decisions and their votes impact the lives of victims and can either support healing or cause further trauma. As this session draws to a close, we can point to some positive movement on bills that will make a difference. Senate Bill 147, sponsored by Senator Shealy, which creates additional protections around confidentiality for survivors of domestic and sexual violence, passed the Senate and will hopefully pass the House next session. House Bill 4158, proposed by Representative Pendarvis, which would allow survivors to terminate a lease without financial penalty so that they can relocate to a safe and confidential location, has passed out of subcommittee and will be taken up by full committee next year. Over 30 other states have laws similar to these. It is good that we are making progress in joining them. Unfortunately, the news is not all good. Senate Bill 143, which adds dating partners to qualifying relationships for orders of protection, continues to be stalled due to some members' discomfort about the implementation of the firearms prohibition on persons subject to an order of protection. The evidence is clear that abusers use guns to threaten and kill victims, children, law enforcement, and other bystanders. Access to a gun makes it 5 times more likely that a woman will die at the hands of their violent partner. In South Carolina, a judge who grants an order of protection must make a specific finding of harm, injury, or threat, and specifically order that they be prohibited from possessing a firearm. We believe that those who have used violence in their relationships have chosen to relinquish their rights to firearms possession. It is a consequence of their actions. While policy choices are made that refuse to acknowledge the danger guns pose in violent relationships, we will continue to witness the heartbreaking high levels of domestic violence homicides. It is our commitment to continue to advocate for this bill and to ensure that all victims of domestic violence have access to the protections available through the family court as they seek to leave an abusive relationship. Today, as we stand on these steps, we are grateful to legislators who are advocates for survivors. And we ask that all elected officials approach their work with a sense of compassion and care for all those who have experienced violence and intimidation.
Sarah, I really appreciated Shannon's updates on pending legislation in this session of the General Assembly in South Carolina. She told us a lot of the bills that were progress for victims' rights, but she also shared with us some of the legislation that isn't great for victims. And so, I think that was, along with the positive, were some things that we needed to pay attention to.
It's one of those things that, their focus is obviously domestic violence and sexual assault. And our focus at SC Van is victims of violent crime in general. But, we go to their trainings all the time. They come to our trainings. We want to support each other because the work that we're doing for victims and survivors is so incredibly important, and making sure that we have, the best practices that we can when we're working with advocates, law enforcement, whoever, is just really critical. And so I'm very glad that we have been able to partner with SCAD-VASA, over the past couple of years with this rally. And certainly I know that we will continue to work together in the future for victims and survivors.
So we were all standing up on the platform. Man in a suit walked up and stood next to Sandy, and I thought to myself, who is that? And why did he just walk up in the middle of this rally and stand like he belonged there?
Because he did.
Because he did. I realized really quickly that Representative White was there for a purpose, and wow, did he not hold back?
I talked with Representative Joe White, I think it was the day before the rally, and he told me that he was going to be there. And, he was just, so happy to support what we were doing. And I was so glad when he was able to join us, because he is feisty as the Dickens. I know that's a South Carolina-ism, feisty as the Dickens. But he just really was. And I love that he's also a freshman legislator. I think he said, we're going to hear from him in a second, he was the oldest freshman legislator that was elected. But he was there to tell us not what we wanted to hear necessarily, but what we needed to hear, and what those legislators inside the State House needed to hear. So let's take a listen, because it was great.
First, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. When I decided to run for a state house, by the way, I am the oldest freshman ever elected to the South Carolina State House. I was 76 when I ran, and I'm 77 now. My number one issue was judicial reform. And I'll say this about judicial reform. Victims will never be treated fairly by any bill that's passed to help victims until judges are selected properly and they are fair judges. We are the only state in America that elects our judges the way we do. That should tell you that we're not doing it the right way. We have a Judicial Merit Selection Commission consisting of 10 people. 5 of them are appointed by the Speaker of the House. 5 of them are appointed by the Senate. Out of that 10, 8 of them are criminal defense attorneys. You have to go through that committee to get approved to be a judge in South Carolina. That means that those 8 criminal defense attorneys have to approve who their judges are going to be, who they will plead cases in front of. That is a wrong system. Out of those 8 criminal defense attorneys, 6 of them are also lawyer legislators who sit either in the Senate or in the House. They have more power than any of us will ever have. When I ran for office, I told everybody, we the people can. But what I've learned, a reporter asked me about a month ago, what have you learned in your first month at the State House? I said, well, you know, we're taught when we're kids that America is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. What I've learned in a month is that government here is of the powerful, by the powerful, and for the powerful. It is up to us, and I'm not Trump, but I like to address the media. Because if the media would bring attention to how we do this in South Carolina, the media could get it stopped. Unless and until we, as the people, raise enough cane, we're not going to get this thing stopped. Here's the problem. When you go campaigning, you know what everybody complains about? They complain about the roads. Some of them complain about education. Very few of them complain about the judicial system, because until your daughter is raped and ends up committing suicide, until your son is murdered, until a lady out here, your brother is murdered and the murderer is put out on bond for $250,000, until that happens, you don't care. It's time that we started caring about these victims, and we put people in, first of all, elect some people that will stand up to this JMSC mess. Secondly, stop the mess of the JMSC. We've got the governor saying he wants to change it. We've got the attorney general saying he wants to change it. My bill, H4183, isn't the complete answer, but it says that lawyer legislators cannot serve on the JMSC anymore. And it says the governor would have the right to appoint some people, not just the head of the Senate and not just the head of the House. So I ask you to look at H4183. I've got 34 sponsors. It's never coming out of committee until we, the people, say it's got to come out of committee. So I thank you. I apologize to all the victims this morning for the fact that our judicial system has failed you. And I just want all of us to pray together and work together to change this injustice system. Thank you.
I loved what Representative White had to say. He did not hold back. He spoke the words that we needed to hear and what everyone needed to hear. And he didn't speak the popular words. He spoke the words that challenge the systems that are in place. And when he said that he was a freshman representative, I was shocked. He was like a seasoned veteran up there. And what I loved about Representative White, and he said this afterwards as I was talking to him after the rally, he said, you know, I don't care what party you're a part of. If you're willing to work with me and beside me and along with me to get change done, let's work together. And in a world,
what a refreshing thing to hear.
Right. In a world that's so polarizing and you're either on this side or you're on that side, you know, what a refreshing thing to hear from a politician. And, sometimes we get annoyed by politicians because we feel like that they say the things that we want to hear. But I think his actions in his freshman year as a representative have backed up those words. He's done that.
Oh, he was talking the talk, but he's been walking that too. He wants to restructure our Judicial Merit Selection Committee, which, as he just explained, it's out of whack. It is heavily, heavily influenced by criminal defense attorneys. And I love being a lawyer. I can't imagine doing anything other than being a lawyer. But I can sit back and say, I don't know, maybe 8 out of 10 lawyers on this one committee that selects our judges. Yeah, maybe that's too much.
Yeah.
Like a lot. lot.
A lot too much. And, he talked a bit about the bill that he has introduced, and he is the first to admit that it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And that's the thing about politics and about lawmaking. Heck, it's the way life is in general. We have to compromise, and we have to come to a consensus, and we have to figure out a way forward. And I think that he has done a really good job of figuring that out, admitting that it's not a perfect bill, but acknowledging that it's a step in the right direction. And I hope that pressure from media, pressure from constituents, can maybe get that bill out of committee onto the floor of the House and the Senate so that true debate can happen. And
we've got to keep calling. We got to get it out of committee. It's got to happen.
Maybe probably not this legislative session, maybe not the next, but maybe one day in South Carolina, we can say that we are no longer one of 2 states that appoints judges in the way that we do.
The way that we do. Yeah. I said to one of the lawyers that I work with earlier this week, I said, sometimes done is better than perfect. And, if we waited for perfection in everything that we do, we would never do anything. We would be frozen in time and we would never accomplish anything. So sometimes just saying, let's just do what we can, the best what we can now, and we can, we'll tweak it as we go. Change is not a bad thing. I'm always saying, all my sayings in my office, I have the sayings, the cliches of like an 89-year-old grandma. But, everything is fixable pretty much. Most things are fixable, especially in the law. There's always that motion that you can write or, that's something that you can do. And when you look at it that way, that helps you not become so paralyzed by, is this perfect? Is this the best we can do? Right. Sometimes you've got to compromise and do what you can on this step and say, all right, our next step, we're going to do this way. And then once we're there, we're going to keep going. And I mean, that's kind of how the name of this podcast came together. I was thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King, and, you don't have to see the entire staircase to take that first step, because we're never going to say, well, now we've got the entire judicial system figured out. We know how we're going to help victims. We know how we're going to do all of this. Here it is. It's in a huge book, and here we go. We're never going to be able to do that, but we can take a step every day, every week, every legislative session, every time we're in a courtroom, every time we are with a victim, toward justice. And it was really refreshing to hear from all of these folks who we've been talking with.
Absolutely.
And last but not least,
yeah,
Veronica Swain Kunz, who's our ombudsman from the South Carolina Attorney General's office.
Can you explain to us what that is? That's the first time I'd ever heard that title. So help us understand what she does.
So Veronica is she's been in office since 2013, and she tells us a little bit. We're going to hear from her, but it's if someone has a problem, if a victim has a problem, they believe that their rights have been violated, you can file a complaint with her office, and they will look into it. They will research it. They'll call people. They will, connect. They will, be the liaison between the prosecutor if necessary, or law enforcement. So they are designed to help solve issues that victims see. And, if there are things that their office is not able to do, there are a lot of victims' rights lawyers that can get involved, and we're able to help in that way for victims. So Veronica has been doing this work for a long, long time. She has such an amazing commitment to crime victims in South Carolina. And I'm glad that we can put out there that she and her amazing staff are wonderful, wonderful resources for crime victims in South Carolina.
Yeah. Let's listen to Veronica.
Thank you all so very much for being here. I believe that Scott Vassa and SC Van invited me to come speak because we are the state's crime victim ombudsman. And that means that we're a liaison between crime victims and the criminal justice process. South Carolina has some of the best laws in the nation for crime victims, yet every day we hear from victims whose cases have gone awry. Something has gone wrong with their system. So we are your problem solvers, crime victims. The staff that I have is amazing. Christina Toller, Sarah Beth Coe, and I work tirelessly to make sure that solicitors, judges, law enforcement officers, probation, the state agencies that serve crime victims are doing their jobs properly. And when they are not, we refer them to some of the amazing lawyers across this state that serve crime victims for free to test the enforceability of crime victims' rights. Now, we have these laws. We have to test whether or not people will comply with these laws. And when they don't, we have answers. So please feel free to pick up a brochure about the Crime Victim Ombudsman's office. We are here for you. We want to support you and fix problems in our broken criminal justice system. Thank you.
I'm grateful for the places, the resources that victims can go to make sure their rights are being recognized. SC Van is a wonderful place for that. But I'm also glad that the AG's office has Veronica in place as another resource for people to be able to reach out and to have their voices heard and maybe find resolution to what's going on in their lives.
Absolutely. When a victim comes to us at South Carolina Victim Assistance Network, or to law enforcement, or to a prosecutor, or any sort of agency, anytime I train people, I try to remind them, this person is coming to you from what is very likely the worst situation that has ever happened to them. They may be at their very lowest they've ever been through things that we can't even fathom or imagine. So the last thing I ever want a victim or survivor to feel is dismissed by anyone, or to feel like they're being shuffled from office to office or person to person. And I think that the AG's office with Veronica and Christina and Sarah Beth over there in the Ombudsman's office, they just do a wonderful job of making sure that victims find that place, those people that can help them no matter what their issue is. And so I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, you closed out the rally with a bang, and I can delete this out later, but I noticed that you were shuffling through your speech at the end of
Good.
and I will share that I was preaching at our church one Sunday, and I am a manuscript preacher, which means I like to write out every single word. And I moved up one paper to start on the next page and realized that what was on the next page was not where I was supposed to be. And that is a really terrifying place to be. But what happened with you, Sarah, is you started speaking off the cuff and your voice changed and you really put an incredibly powerful bow on an incredibly powerful 45 minutes of hearing speaker after speaker hearing their story. And as the producer of the show and as the person that edits all of the content, I guess I have the ability to take things out or leave things in. And as I was re-listening to the video of the rally, I was like, Sarah's last words to end this rally, they have to stay in because they were just so strong, spoken from a place of deep compassion for victims and their stories. And I was really grateful for what you had to say. And I think I can speak for everybody else that the sentiment was there around the lawn of the State House.
Well, thank you. That is, you know, I'm a lawyer, so I don't mind talking. But when, I was introducing every speaker, trying to give the bios of everyone. And, at some point they just got shuffled, and it was like, I knew what I wanted to say, just not exactly how it came out. But I'm grateful that the message was there and that that y'all were able to hear, how important it is to have support for victims, but also to know that we're not going anywhere, that this momentum that we're building in this victims' rights movement, the renewed victims' rights movement, we're going to keep rolling. And, sometimes my daddy will say, put the paper down, just talk. And it was one of those moments. It was like, okay, all right, well, I guess you got a lot of people looking at you and a lot of cameras. You can't run away. So you got to just talk. And so I'm glad that the message was there and that it was the bow to wrap up the entire rally. So it was an honor to help coordinate this event and to be able to introduce the speakers and to wrap this event up. I'm a planner, like a long-term planner. I'm thinking, okay, what are we going to do next year? How are we going to make this better? What are we going to do?
Far too often we see things on the news, on Facebook, when things are wrong. We cannot change what we don't understand or acknowledge. I challenge us. I see that there is hope today for victims in South Carolina. We will accept nothing less. While power and privilege seem to reign supreme in South Carolina, to those of us who stand beside victims in a courtroom or those lobbying for change here at the State House, we know that eventually that power will cease to exert that same influence because the people will not allow it. We will not stand for it. The people will choose to protect and advocate for victims and survivors. That's why we're here. As a victim of sexual assault myself, that's why I'm here. I hope that hearing from all of these incredible speakers today will push us all, particularly those here in the State House, to acknowledge the inequities that victims face, demand accountability, and commit to changing and making South Carolina a better place for all victims. Those in power have taken notice of this movement. This is a movement, and the only movement we can make is forward. For Dallas, for Stephen, for Damien, for Gavin, for all victims. We will not back down. Thank you all for being here. We are planning to go into the State House at 10:30 a.m. So a few minutes before that, we will do an advocacy and action so you know who your legislators are and how you can contact them so they can come out of the lobby to meet with you, their constituents. You have that right, and I encourage you to stay to do that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for helping show that victims matter in South Carolina.